Welcome back to another chilling episode, where we delve not just into the what and how of true crime, but also the why. Today, we're unraveling a case that has gripped the nation, the University of Idaho murders. But we're going a step further. We're diving deep into the psychological underpinnings of this horrifying event. Why is it crucial to understand the psychology behind such a crime? Because it's often in the darkest corners of the human mind that these tragedies are born. By exploring the psychological motives and triggers, we can perhaps begin to make sense of what seems utterly senseless. We can also better understand the warning signs, the red flags that might, just might, prevent a future tragedy. So, buckle up as we embark on a journey into the human psyche, dissecting the elements that culminated in a nightmare that the peaceful college town of Moscow, Idaho, will never forget. Stay tuned, because this is not just a story of crime. It's a story of the human mind, its complexities, and its capabilities for both love and destruction. In the wake of the devastating tragedy that unfolded at the University of Idaho, one question looms large. What drives someone to commit such heinous acts? To understand the mind of the killer responsible for the senseless loss of young lives, we delve into various psychological theories and profiles that could shed light on this dark aspect of human behavior. Nature versus nurture. One of the most debated theories in psychology is whether violent tendencies are innate or acquired. In this case, did the killer have a genetic predisposition for violence? Or was it a result of environmental factors such as upbringing or exposure to violence? Psychopathy. Psychopaths lack empathy and remorse, traits that are crucial for moral and social conduct. They are manipulative and can mimic emotions to blend into society. Could the killer be a psychopath who sees others merely as objects to manipulate for personal gain? Narcissistic personality disorder. Individuals with this disorder have an inflated sense of their own importance and a deep need for excessive attention and admiration. Did the killer commit these acts to gain notoriety, to be the focus of media attention? Perhaps. The thrill seeker. Some individuals are addicted to the adrenaline rush that comes from committing dangerous acts. Was the killer chasing an emotional high, a feeling of power and control? The organized offender. This type of killer is methodical and plans their crimes carefully. They often follow their victims and strike with calculated precision. Given the nature of the crime, multiple victims in one location, it's possible the killer falls into this category. The disorganized offender. These individuals act on impulse and leave clues at the crime scene. Their acts are often chaotic, reflecting their disordered state of mind. Could the killer be someone who acted on a sudden, violent impulse? The mission-oriented offender. This type of individual believes they are on a mission to eliminate a particular group of people. Given that the victims were all university students, could the killer have been targeting this demographic for some twisted ideological reason? Understanding the mind of a killer is a complex task that involves piecing together a myriad of psychological, social, and environmental factors. While it's tempting to categorize the perpetrator into a single type or theory, the human psyche is far too complex for such simplification. As we await further developments in the investigation, we're left grappling with the unsettling reality that understanding the mind of someone capable of such acts is a labyrinthine task, fraught with more questions than answers. In any discussion about violent crime, it's crucial not to lose sight of the victims. The young lives lost in the University of Idaho tragedy experienced unimaginable psychological terror in their final moment. While it's uncomfortable to delve into such a sensitive topic, understanding the psychology of fear they likely endured can offer us a more complete picture of the crime's true horror. When faced with life-threatening situations, the brain's amygdala activates the fight-or-flight response. This primal mechanism floods the body with adrenaline, heightening senses and preparing the individual for rapid action. For the victims, this response would have kicked in almost instantaneously, sharpening their awareness but also amplifying their terror. In high-stress situations, many report experiencing a slowing down of time, a phenomenon attributed to the brain's heightened state of awareness. For the victims, what were likely mere minutes or even seconds could have felt like an agonizing eternity. Psychologists differentiate between anticipatory fear and acute fear. Anticipatory fear is the dread of something bad that might happen, while acute fear is the immediate response to a threat. The victims likely experienced both. The anticipatory fear when they realized they were in danger, followed by acute fear during the attack. One of the most psychologically damaging aspects of violent crime is the feeling of helplessness it instills in its victims. Being unable to prevent or escape a life-threatening situation can leave a lasting impact on the psyche, even in situations where the victim survives. For those who didn't make it, this feeling of helplessness would have added an extra layer of emotional torment to their final moment. Given that multiple victims were involved, it's likely that a shared experience of fear occurred. This collective psychological state can sometimes lead to a diffusion of responsibility, where each individual hopes or expects that someone else will take action. Unfortunately, in this case, the collective fear would have only amplified the individual experiences of terror. While we can never truly know what went through the minds of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin in their final moments, understanding the psychology of fear allows us to grasp the depth of their suffering more fully. It serves as a haunting reminder of the human cost of such senseless violence. In the aftermath of a violent crime, a question that often arises is, why didn't anyone intervene? This question becomes even more pressing when the crime occurs in a community setting, like the University of Idaho. To understand this, we delve into the psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect. The bystander effect is a social psychological theory that states that individuals are less likely to offer help in emergency situations when other people are present. The more bystanders there are, the less likely it is that any one of them will step forward to help. One of the key factors contributing to the bystander effect is the diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people witness an emergency, the responsibility to act is spread out among all the witnesses. Each individual may think, someone else will probably do something, leading to inaction. Another factor is pluralistic ignorance, where bystanders look to others for cues on how to act. If no one else is reacting, individuals may assume that a response isn't needed, even if the situation is dire. People often hesitate to intervene due to fear of social embarrassment or repercussions. What if they misinterpret the situation and intervene unnecessarily? This fear can paralyze people into inaction, even when someone's life is at stake. In the Idaho student murders, the bystander effect could have played a role in several ways. The crime occurred in an off-campus house, and it's possible that neighbors or passers-by might have heard or seen something unusual. The diffusion of responsibility and fear of social repercussions could have deterred them from taking immediate action, like calling the police. Understanding the bystander effect is the first step in breaking its cycle. Public awareness campaigns and educational programs can equip people with the knowledge and courage to intervene when they witness a crime or emergency, potentially saving lives. For the community surrounding the University of Idaho, the question of why no one intervened will likely haunt them for years to come. While we can't change the past, understanding the psychology behind such an action can help prevent future tragedies. When a violent crime occurs, its impact reverberates far beyond the immediate victims and their families. It sends shockwaves through the entire community, affecting the collective psyche in profound ways. In the case of the Idaho student murders, the community of Moscow, Idaho, found itself grappling with a level of collective trauma that was unprecedented in its recent history. The first wave of collective trauma often manifests as shock and disbelief. "This can't be happening here" is a common sentiment, especially in a community like Moscow, where violent crimes are rare. The peaceful college town was suddenly thrust into a state of emergency, shattering its sense of safety and security. The trauma doesn't stop at the immediate circle of the victims. Friends, neighbors, teachers, and even casual acquaintances can experience symptoms of trauma, such as anxiety, sleep disturbances, and a pervasive sense of dread. The ripple effect extends to first responders and investigators, who bear the emotional weight of the case. In the wake of such a tragedy, communities often experience a paradoxical mix of social cohesion and isolation. On one hand, there's a strong desire to come together, to mourn collectively, and to seek comfort in numbers. On the other hand, the trauma can create a sense of isolation, as individuals struggle with their own emotional responses, sometimes feeling disconnected from those who haven't been as deeply affected. The role of media and social media can't be understated in shaping the community's collective trauma. Constant news updates and social media discussions can serve as both a source of information and a trigger for re-traumatization. The community becomes the focal point of national and sometimes international attention, adding another layer of stress. Collective trauma has long-term psychological implications. Increased rates of depression, substance abuse, and even suicide can plague communities for years following a major traumatic event. Support systems, mental health services, and community dialogues become crucial in navigating the path to healing. Recovery is a long and complex process that involves both individual and collective healing. Community vigils, memorial services, and public forums can serve as therapeutic outlets for communal grief and trauma. However, the scars remain, serving as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of community support. In the digital age, the phenomenon of armchair detectives has gained significant traction, especially in high-profile cases like the Idaho student murders. Social media platforms become virtual crime scenes where thousands of people, from all walks of life, gather to dissect every detail, share theories, and even conduct their own investigations. But what drives this intense fascination and involvement? Let's delve into the psychological underpinnings. Firstly, there's an innate human curiosity and a desire to solve puzzles. True crime stories present a complex web of motives, evidence, and characters that engage the problem-solving parts of our brain. The thrill of potentially cracking a case or discovering a new lead can be intoxicating. Armchair detectives often find a sense of community among like-minded individuals online. These online spaces become a haven where people can share their thoughts without judgment, united by a common goal. The sense of belonging can be a powerful motivator, especially for those who may feel isolated in their day-to-day lives. Engaging deeply with a true crime story can also provide an illusion of control over the chaos and unpredictability of life. By dissecting the motives of a killer or the missteps of an investigation, people feel as though they are gaining some control over the uncontrollable aspects of human behavior and societal systems. For some, living vicariously through the investigators or even the victims provides a form of emotional release. It's a way to experience extreme situations without the actual risks involved. This can be both a coping mechanism and a form of escapism. Psychologists often talk about the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. While not all armchair detectives possess these traits, the anonymity of social media can sometimes bring out darker impulses, such as the desire for recognition at any cost, even if it means spreading false information. While the involvement of armchair detectives can sometimes aid official investigations by bringing new perspectives and even uncovering overlooked details, it can also hinder the process. Misinformation, public pressure, and the trial by social media can compromise the integrity of an investigation. As we engage in these online discussions and investigations, it's crucial to remember the ethical implications. The lives affected by these crimes are real, and the line between constructive involvement and harmful interference can be thin. When a tragedy like the Idaho student murders occurs, the ripple effect is far-reaching, affecting not just the immediate victims but also their families, friends, and communities. The families of the victims go through a complex psychological journey that is often overlooked in the media's focus on the crime itself. Let's delve into the emotional and psychological stages these families experience. The first news of the tragedy often comes as a surreal, almost unbelievable event. The mind's first defense mechanism is often denial, a way to buffer the immediate emotional impact. This stage can be short-lived but intense, marked by a sense of numbness and disbelief. As the reality sets in, families often experience intense anger toward the perpetrator, the system, or even themselves for perceived failures or shortcomings. Bargaining is another common stage, where families may make internal deals or bargains with a higher power, often in a desperate attempt to reverse the irreversible. The weight of the loss starts to sink in during this stage. Families may withdraw from social activities, avoid reminders of their loved ones, and even experience symptoms of clinical depression. This stage is often the longest and can be the most challenging to navigate. For many families, seeking justice for their loved ones becomes a way to find meaning in the chaos. This can manifest in various ways: following the investigation closely, pushing for legal reforms, or even becoming advocates for victims' rights. While the pursuit of justice can be empowering, it can also be emotionally draining. Acceptance doesn't mean forgetting or moving on. It means learning to live with the new reality. Families may start to find joy in life again, honor their loved ones in meaningful ways, and even use their experience to help others. However, acceptance is not a destination but a process, one that can involve setbacks and require ongoing emotional work. Throughout these stages, the support from extended family, friends, and even strangers can be invaluable. Community vigils, memorial services, and social media campaigns can offer a sense of collective mourning and solidarity, helping families feel less alone in their grief. It's important to note that not everyone will go through all these stages, and not necessarily in this order. Grief is a highly individual process, influenced by numerous factors including cultural background, personal beliefs, and previous experiences with loss. In any criminal investigation, especially one as complex and emotionally charged as the Idaho student murders, the role of psychology is not just confined to understanding the criminal or the victims. It extends into the very fabric of the investigative process. Law enforcement agencies employ a range of psychological tactics to solve crimes, interrogate suspects, and even manage their own stress levels. Let's delve into some of these methods. One of the first steps in an investigation of this magnitude is criminal profiling. By analyzing the crime scene, the nature of the attacks, and other key details, investigators try to build a psychological profile of the perpetrator. This helps them narrow down suspects and can even influence how they conduct interrogations. The read technique is one of the most commonly used psychological interrogation methods. It involves establishing a rapport with the suspect, then introducing an element of surprise or confrontation to elicit reactions that may indicate guilt. However, this technique has been criticized for sometimes leading to false confessions, and investigators must use it judiciously. While not admissible in all courts, polygraph tests are still used as a psychological tool to gauge a suspect's truthfulness. The idea is that physiological responses like heart rate and perspiration can betray a person's mental state. This classic tactic involves two investigators taking on opposing roles, one sympathetic and the other confrontational, to disorient the suspect and make them more likely to divulge information. The psychological toll on investigators is often underestimated. Dealing with gruesome crime scenes and the emotional weight of the victims' families can lead to burnout. Many law enforcement agencies have started incorporating psychological support and stress management techniques to help investigators cope. In high-profile cases, investigators often have to manage the psychology of a community in panic. Assigning a community liaison officer who can communicate effectively with the public can help manage collective anxiety, and also aid in gathering tips or leads from the community. Sometimes, saying nothing is the most powerful tool in an interrogation. Silence can make suspects uncomfortable, prompting them to speak to fill the void and potentially reveal more than they intended. While much attention is given to the psychology of the criminal and the victims, the mental and emotional toll on those responsible for solving the case is often overlooked. Investigating a violent crime, especially one as shocking as the Idaho student murders, can have lasting psychological impacts on law enforcement officers. Let's delve into this often ignored aspect. Officers are trained to remain detached, but the human mind is not a switch that can be turned on and off. The emotional investment in solving a case, especially one involving young victims, can be overwhelming. The drive to bring justice can sometimes blur the lines between professional duty and personal involvement. Investigators are repeatedly exposed to the details of the crime scene photos, and the emotional outpouring from the victims' families. This can lead to vicarious trauma, a form of emotional exhaustion that comes from empathetic engagement with the victims. The constant need to make critical decisions, often with incomplete information, can lead to decision fatigue. This psychological strain can impact an investigator's ability to make rational choices, affecting both the case and their personal life. In high-profile cases like this, there's immense public pressure to solve the crime quickly. The weight of these expectations can add another layer of stress, making the investigators more prone to anxiety and second-guessing their actions. Many investigators turn to coping mechanisms, both healthy and unhealthy, to deal with the stress. Exercise, counseling, and peer support are some of the healthier options, while some unfortunately may resort to substance abuse as a form of escape. Recognizing the need for psychological support, many law enforcement agencies are now incorporating mental health resources and regular psychological evaluations to help officers cope with the emotional and mental strains of the job. While they may not wear capes, investigators are the unsung heroes who bear an enormous psychological burden. Their mental resilience not only helps solve the case but also brings closure to the victim's family, even as they grapple with their own emotional and psychological challenges. The moment the gavel comes down and a sentence is pronounced, a multitude of psychological factors come into play, not just for the convicted but also for society at large. This section aims to explore the psychological underpinnings of criminal sentencing and how it shapes our collective understanding of justice. The psychological theories behind sentencing often boil down to two main schools of thought: retribution and rehabilitation. Retribution is rooted in the idea of an eye for an eye, where the punishment should be proportionate to the crime. Rehabilitation, on the other hand, focuses on treating the underlying psychological issues that led to criminal behavior. For the victims' families and the community, a harsh sentence can often bring a sense of closure and justice. This emotional satisfaction is deeply rooted in our psychology, where we equate punishment with a form of moral balance. One of the psychological theories often cited in favor of harsh sentencing is deterrence theory. The idea is that the fear of severe punishment will deter potential criminals. However, the effectiveness of this theory is still a subject of ongoing debate among psychologists and criminologists. When a sentence is perceived as too lenient or too harsh, it can create cognitive dissonance within the community. This psychological tension can lead to public outcry, protests, and even a loss of faith in the judicial system. The type of sentence, whether it's imprisonment, parole, or something else, has a significant psychological impact on the convicted individual. Long-term imprisonment can lead to mental health issues, while rehabilitative approaches like therapy and education aim to reintegrate individuals into society. The sentencing also has a ripple effect on the families of the convicted, affecting their psychological well-being. The shame, stigma, and stress can have long-lasting impacts, often overlooked in the judicial process. The media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception of sentencing. Sensationalized reporting can influence public opinion, which in turn can put pressure on legal proceedings, adding another layer of psychological complexity to the issue. Despite advances in psychological research, the question remains, does the punishment fit the crime? This unresolved dilemma continues to challenge our societal views on justice, fairness, and morality. In the aftermath of a crime as shocking as the University of Idaho murders, the concept of closure becomes a focal point for everyone involved, from the victims' families to the investigators and even the public who have followed the case closely. This section delves into the psychological intricacies of closure and how it's pursued, achieved, or sometimes agonizingly missed. Psychologically, closure is a cognitive and emotional quenching, a way for the human mind to make sense of events that are otherwise incomprehensible. It's a mechanism to regain control over a situation that had, for a time, spiraled into chaos. For many, the judicial process serves as a pathway to closure. The arrest, trial, and sentencing offer a narrative structure that helps people make sense of the tragedy. However, the legal definition of justice may not always align with the emotional and psychological closure that the victim's families seek. Closure is not guaranteed and is often a complex, ongoing process. For some, a conviction may bring a sense of finality, but for others, questions may remain unanswered, leaving a lingering sense of unease and incompleteness. Communities and families often engage in rituals or create memorials to honor the victims. These acts serve as both a tribute and a form of collective closure, allowing people to externalize their grief and find a sense of community in their shared loss. The human mind has a tendency to ruminate on what-ifs and alternative scenarios. This cognitive process can be both a hindrance and a help in achieving closure. While it can lead to insights and acceptance, it can also perpetuate a cycle of emotional pain. Closure is not just important for the victims' families. It's also crucial for the investigators who've spent countless hours on the case. Solving it can bring a sense of professional and emotional completion, but the haunting nature of the crime can leave lasting psychological scars. In the wake of such a tragedy, the community also seeks to find meaning and closure. Public vigils, community meetings, and even social media discussions can serve as platforms for collective processing of the trauma. In the end, closure is a deeply personal and psychologically complex process. It varies from individual to individual and can be influenced by a myriad of factors, including the nature of the crime, the outcome of the judicial process, and individual coping mechanisms. As we reach the end of this unsettling journey through the psychological landscape of the University of Idaho murders, it's important to acknowledge that despite the extensive analysis, there remain unanswered questions that continue to haunt us. While we've delved into the psychological theories that might explain the actions of the killer, the truth is that the human mind is an enigma. Even with a conviction, the question of why may never be fully answered, leaving a void that challenges our understanding of human behavior. On the flip side, the resilience shown by the victims' families, the investigators, and the community at large raises questions about the incredible strength of the human spirit. How do people find the strength to move forward after such a devastating event? The role of social media in this case has been both a blessing and a curse. While it has enabled a form of collective grieving and investigation, it also raises questions about the ethics and psychological impact of armchair detective culture. The sentencing may bring legal closure, but does it bring psychological closure? The justice system operates within its own framework, often leaving emotional and psychological needs unaddressed. Closure is a complex, ongoing process that doesn't end when the case is closed. For some, it might take years or even a lifetime to come to terms with the events that unfolded. What are the long-term psychological effects on those directly and indirectly involved? Lastly, how does a community heal from collective trauma? The psychological impact of such a crime ripples through the community, affecting even those who were not directly involved. The path to healing is long and fraught with psychological complexities. As we conclude this video, let's take a moment to reflect on the psychological intricacies that make this case so hauntingly complex. While some questions may never be answered, the quest for understanding continues to drive us, both as individuals and as a society. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the psychological aspects of the University of Idaho murders. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. Your engagement helps us explore more cases with the depth and nuance they deserve. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay safe.